Yes, thank you so much, viewers and the participants to this session. I think it's important that we introduce ourselves, the panelists. I have Veronica Mwangi. I'll give her a chance to also, introduce ourselves. I have Dorcas Wamboi. Dorcas, you will be able to introduce yourself. And then I have also Demon. I have Annette, and myself. I was waiting for Evelyn Onunga and Rachel, but I think, and David from the Anti-Human Trafficking Child Protection Unit within the DCI. So quickly, I can start with Veronica Mwangi. Quickly introduce yourself and what you do, so that in that way, then we are able to link up with the session's subject, which is access to justice for victims of human trafficking. And you can link some of the work you do in line to the subject before we go to the details.
I am Veronica Mwangi. I work with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. I am a deputy director, currently the coordinator of social human rights project. Sorry, there is a bit of noise. I don't know.
Is it Dorcas? You can check your background.
Yeah, it
yes,
has gone.
Now we are clear.
Thank you. Sorry for that. It's okay. So I'm Veronica Mwangi, working with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. I am a deputy director, currently heading a department that is known as the Reforms and Accountability, where we focus largely on institutional reforms. Beyond that, I am coordinating migration and human rights advocacy work in Kenya, and this is largely looking at the role of human rights in migration management. So with regard to the topic today, access to justice for victims of trafficking, for victims of human trafficking, what we largely do as a commission is that we aid the public in terms of, one, creating awareness on the different reporting mechanisms to encourage the community involvement in counter-trafficking in persons efforts. But also we conduct awareness creation in different forums, for instance, commemorating different days. And beyond that also we have partnership where we have focused on building capacity of the different access to justice partners, not just in Nairobi, but also across the 6 regions where we have our regional offices. So beyond that, we continue to receive cases of individuals, persons who work in our offices. Either this could be relatives or parents of persons who've been affected by human trafficking. They come into our offices, they lodge the complaint, and we support in terms of looking at the facts and advising them on what is the actual way forward in terms of seeking redress. So there are areas where we have a lot of referral partnership going on. We refer these cases, we work closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There are situations where we've had to work with the UNHCR. There are situations, especially where you have a lot of a dynamic where you have a person who's been affected, but then there are concerns on whether they were asylum seekers who are coming on board or whether they were smuggled, a lot of that. So we also work closely with the Department of Criminal Investigations, as alluded earlier, and also the counter-trafficking in persons. But beyond that also, we involve ourselves in advising government on matters policy and how best to mainstream human rights-based approach. So largely in migration management, this is largely a victim-centered approach where you look at migration as a reality that all of us are involved in, as a tool or a strategy that has assisted human beings to fight poverty, and call upon all the different actors to come in and deliberate on how best to manage migration without necessarily looking at migration as a bad thing, but rather encouraging migration and trying to weed out the funny elements in terms of the human traffickers and the human smugglers. Beyond that, also we undertake research that again identifies areas which are gaps or other systemic human rights violations areas, and we then use these to advocate for the rights of migrants, and in particular support the government in combating fight against human trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. That's a detailed work you do. We wish we had a whole day so that we can really come through some of the issues that you come through, especially on research. But in between your presentation, you can pick some of the areas that are more relevant to the subject. I have Annette. Annette Callum, tell us the agency you work with and what you do exactly in relation to the subject. We can hear you,
I hope
but
you
we
can
can't
hear
see
me,
you.
Ivan. The internet is very shaky.
Okay,
that's why I've
that's
decided
okay.
to use audio for now. If it's time, I'll turn on my video. My name is Annette Chirabida from Uganda. I'm a counseling psychologist by profession and the executive director of Rehab Uganda, and currently the interim chair of the Uganda Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. I'm the chair of the advisory board. In terms of working with victims, we do both prevention work and also protection work, providing aftercare services and all that goes with the protection work. Yes, I think in summary, that's how I can introduce myself.
I heard you clearly. Thanks so much, Annette from Uganda. We will deal more on the psychosocial support in relations to access to justice and how do you prepare some of the victims, especially when it comes to justice system framework. Fair enough. And then Dorcas Wamboi.
Yes, thank you, Evans. My name is Dorcas Wamboi. I'm a lawyer, currently working with a consortium of organizations such as ANCAN, MACT, SND, TDH, and we also work in conjunction with the Department of Child Services. My major role is I'm a legal officer, so what I usually do is provide legal aid services and for victims and sometimes their relatives or their caregivers. So I would provide advice, so legal representation in court now for the victims of child trafficking. In summary, that is what I do.
Thank you so much, Dorcas. I will talk more because you've worked very closely with the victims, and especially we talk about court and support to access that justice with the law enforcers. And you have interacted with the law enforcers right from the grassroots up to the superior courts. I think that would be more important to get more experiences and on what are some of the challenges, especially when it comes to ensuring that victims access their unalienable right to access to justice. Damon, now that you're here, I think I'll be wrong if I don't grant you a chance to say something in relation to access to justice.
I think, Evans, I'm just in to give you all the necessary support. So I think you can continue the panelists you have.
Yes, many thanks, Damon. Damon is from Uganda, but feel free to interject where we have cross-cutting issues and where you feel like we can be able to accommodate your questions and your additions. Now, because of the subject and it is weight it carries when we talk about human trafficking, prosecution has been an issue, and it's important that we talk about how do this victim access justice. We will deal with three tiers, but I will start with Veronica. When we talk about access to justice to victim of human trafficking, in your understanding and in relation to the kind of work you're doing as the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, you have faced some of the challenges, even from your end and even from the victim perspective. Can you please take us through some of the challenges that really make access to justice in relation to this victim? so that we are able now to understand some of the gaps, some of the solutions, because it's important that as we have this discourse, we look at the challenges, the gaps, vis-a-vis the documentation that we have, and how best can we harmonize so that we're making progress.
Thank you for the question.
Carlo?
Thank you. Thank you. That of course, access to justice remains one of those areas which has really faced a lot of challenges. One, due to the fact that if you look at Kenya and also Uganda, we have had our laws maybe in the past decade. So, for instance, in Kenya, we have the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act 2010, a law that was enacted a decade ago. But in terms of implementation, there is a high possibility that we are not even talking about 70% implementation. There is a high chance, and I'm saying this with a lot of respect to all the different duty bearers we work with in the criminal justice, that this particular act is implemented probably at most at 40%. And this is a reality then that speaks to the impact on how the victims of trafficking a right to access justice is affected. So one, we have the laws. I will not call them new laws, but we have laws which have been enacted, but we do not have proper follow-up mechanism of awareness creation of these particular laws. And I'll give an instance where we went to a certain police station, and as we were following up on a matter of a victim of trafficking, we learned that the investigation officer, by virtue of not having specialized training and existence or knowledge of existence of the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act, preferred charges against this, into brackets, trafficker, using the Sexual Offences Act. That is to mean the officer knew what to do with regards to preferring charges, but did not have the adequate knowledge to use the right law and even to use the right law to guide in terms of the investigation and, of course, subsequently preparing charges against this person. So one of the challenges, again, is the law, their implementation, awareness creation on some of these laws. And then the next challenge to access to justice for a victim largely is lack of clarity on referral pathways. I know in Kenya, we have developed what we are calling National Referral Mechanisms Guideline. And these guidelines are supposed to assist the different players, starting with the state actors, non-state actors, and even the communities in one, identifying who is a victim of trafficking, and secondly, supporting the reporting of these cases to the relevant agencies that can offer assistance. So the third area or the third challenge that I would really speak to is the fact that the coordination of the victim cases, the victims of trafficking cases, immediately from the community all the way to the criminal justice is really not functional, I would say so. And the functionality of this chain link or referral pathway comes because of one, overemphasizing on just what it is. Trafficking in persons is ABCD, and really speaking about trafficking in persons in theories or in academic or in different forums, but not really setting up structures that can allow different actors in different areas or regions in this country to know when to call the police, when to report this case to the nearest local administration office or the civil society organization or even a church elder, and how to expect the feedback from this mechanism. So those are some of the realities that we have when it comes to access to justice for victims, and they really impact on how the victims' rights are supported. And I would really just reiterate on what I said in the initial forum, that because of the broken pathway of identifying and assisting the victims of trafficking, and not having practical systems that have been established. You end up getting victims of human trafficking getting their rights violated, not by one actor, but by different actors, including actors who are service providers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you've given quite an elaborate some of the challenge really defining the access to justice. There is one area that I think I agree with you, but I'll come back to you and think through about the victim protection services also as one of the area that is becoming a challenge, if not has been a challenge before. You've talked about like in Kenya, I know we have the Counter Trafficking in Person Act, I think of 2010. Yeah, it's a legal document that I feel it's not popular, and you alluded to that fact that we have, you know, poor follow-up mechanisms. We have, you know, lack of awareness among different players on the law enforcement, right from people who correct information from the grassroots, people who prepare these charge sheets. You find that they are not using, you know, the collect law to make that case. And we will need to dig more into that. When we have a legal document in different agencies, and I can name them, we have the DCI, we have the Department of Directorate of Criminal Investigation, we have the DPP, we have also the police force who make arrests, we have the civil society. What is the role of different players in ensuring that we have these officers' capacity built, we have these officers understand the existence of this law so that when they do these arrests, when they make these charges, they make using proper legal documentation that exists. That will come back, especially on the role of the Kenya National Human Rights to ensure that all that is harmonized, because you talked about coordination being an issue, really. You talked about national referral mechanisms. Poor systems that are not working, right from the government to the civil society organizations. Where is the weak link? We will need to have that discourse going through, and I'll invite the viewers and the participants to engage us on this discussion because your experience working in this sector, right from wherever you work, it's important so that we make through the case as we make action plans on areas that we feel like have weak link. Dorcas, you have engaged different players, right from the government to the court, you know, civil society organizations. Veronica talked about awareness creation on some of the laws that exist. What will you pick from the victim side that hampers the case to move forward? Looking at, of course, she talked about lack of, you know, that clarity in terms of protecting, you know, these victims, laws and everything. From the victim-centered approach, what will you pick is the issue really, not looking at what she has alluded to. What will you pick from the victim-centered approach? What will you pick as some of the challenges that victims needs also to be prepared? Because she talked more of the systems not working. But from the victim side, what will you pick as some of the challenges that hampers the access to justice?
Thank you for that question. I believe if I understood your question well, you want me to explain on how on the victims, what makes victims not access justice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the issues that I have encountered while trying to follow up on these cases is what Veronica had initially mentioned on the unpopularity of the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act. It is so unpopular to such an extent that the police would prefer not really a wrong charge, but the main charge of trafficking will not appear anywhere in the charge sheet. So we engage more with the law enforcement officers so that we can popularize the act and explain to them on the facts or the story, so that when they are preferring the charges, they have an understanding of what has happened and the correct charge that is supposed to be preferred. For instance, I had a case where it was a child trafficking case, but because both the police officer and the prosecutor had not interacted with the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act, they decided to charge the perpetrator with abduction or kidnapping, either of the two. So I had to explain it to them. We were already in court, so I had to explain to the prosecutor on what had transpired, and we had to ask the court for leave so that we could amend the charges and include the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act. So the more the implementation bit would be felt when such when such cases of trafficking are given the correct charge. Another challenge that would prevent the victims from accessing justice would be, I'm not sure if it's the backlog of cases, or if, because the victims and the witnesses all together, they sometimes get tired of waiting for their cases to be concluded in good time. And most especially, it's the witnesses that might back out from the proceeding altogether. And one of the reasons could be maybe they are tired and they need to get back to their lives, because they usually the back and forth, come to court, the court is adjourned, come to court, the perpetrator or the lawyer for the accused person is not ready to proceed. So the back and forth sometimes usually makes them tired and give up altogether. And the second reason could be maybe they are receiving threats from the perpetrator or their agents. And another thing would be that the threats actually are critical, because sometimes the perpetrator, they have a right to bail and bond. So when they have made their case and the magistrate has allowed them to be freed on bail, I usually feel, especially when it's the exploitation bit was on sexual exploitation, it is very difficult to ask the court to not to grant the perpetrator bail, because we know what will happen when this perpetrator is granted bail, and yet the victim is not somewhere safe, is not in a shelter. The victim is just back at home waiting for the next court session. So sometimes I usually feel once the perpetrator is out on bail, they can approach the victim, or they can send threats to the victim. And what this results in is that the victim might want to recant their statement or refuse to give their testimony altogether. And the last issue that might delay justice for the victims is the proof that the burden of proof that is laid on the prosecutors. They need to prove that the exploitation bit really happened. And this had been mentioned by Evelyn in the previous session, where, for instance, where the act had already happened, the transportation or the harboring or the transferring had already happened, but then this criminal activity was intercepted before the exploitation bit happened. So you will come to court, you have your perpetrator, the court will ask you to prove the act and the exploitation bit. So, well, you can prove the act, but now what happens to the exploitation bit? So I think the burden of proof on the prosecutor to really prove that the exploitation bit really happened can sometimes deter justice for the victim. And yeah, I think those with the relationships, with the interactions I've had with the law enforcement officers and the prosecution bit, and also the community. If I could mention lastly on how the community looks at the whole child trafficking issue, is that in as much as we have done the awareness creation, what usually misses out is the prosecution bit, because we will ask them to, we will educate them on the prevention mechanism or on how to protect these children, and the community will act on that. But then I think what sometimes they usually miss is that after we've protected these children, after we have ventured on ways on how to prevent them, cases need to be reported. It is not enough for us to protect these children. These cases need to be reported. So that is where the issue usually comes in, that there are so many cases, but they're usually not reported. Maybe because the community intervened before trying to come up with a strategy on how to arrest the perpetrator. Because most cases have not seen the light of day in court because they were in a hurry to protect the victims, or to remove the victim from that situation that he or she was in, and forget about the perpetrator. So the moment the perpetrator is alerted that this child is coming to be rescued, or word has it that someone knows that he's doing 1, 2, 3 to this child, the perpetrator is gets the alert and vanishes. So we only have the child with no perpetrator. So sometimes that can also delay justice for the child.
Wow, thanks so much, Dorcas. There are two things that are coming out strongly on the component of capacity building of some of the key actors in the access to justice. We'll be able to dissect more into that, and also the issue about threats to the victims when you find that the perpetrators are out either on bail, because of course they're in a position where they can create some panic to the victims. That brings me to the question of Veronica. How is the victim protection agencies, especially when you are talking about these serious heinous crimes of human trafficking, how do victim protection agencies comes into play, and has it been really working to ensure that most of these victims get support that they require, the evidence that is admissible before court is really corrected, and we are using proper legal frameworks to ensure that they are protected from any kind of harassment? How has that been?
Thank you. Just to support what Dorcas has said, that oftentimes these challenges end up getting to the victim, and that is what we call a victim double jeopardy that is suffered but that is suffered by the victim. Because it is one thing for the victim to go through the violation or to go through the trafficking. Of course, through that process, they suffer a lot of impact in terms of where it can be physically, psychologically, emotionally, and even socially. But also, it is adding salt to the injury if then you get to the systems that are supposed to support you and to avail you the actual redress, and you find that these systems are not working. So just to really support that and the conversation we have here, with regard to what or how does the witness protection or the victim get support from some of these agencies that are supposed to guarantee the realization of the rights of the victim? I would want to go to the fact that in Kenya we have the Witness Protection Agency, and confirm that as a national commission, we sit in their advisory board. So we have a commissioner who serves as a member of this particular advisory board of the Witness Protection Agency. The appreciation and the role that we play in that particular board is to bring in the human rights-based approach. And I think one of the key things I will keep on reiterating in these meetings is the fact that national human rights institutions bring in their expertise in ensuring that there is adherence to human rights in different topical conversations in different areas and different government services. So the witness protection agencies ideally are supposed to receive some of these cases where we have victims of trafficking going through difficulties and requiring their services. So we have either if it's a civil society organization handling, or if the matter is already in the court system and we have the prosecution, the prosecutor or the prosecution counsel, they are supposed to raise these matters to the witness protection agencies and of course identify what are the needs. From there, you'll have the witness protection agency, especially if it is an issue of the risk. They'll of course move into they'll take up the case, evaluate the risks that appertains that particular person and the case in the case itself, and then they will then determine using their different internal policies. They then will determine what sort of assistance is going to be given to this particular victim. So there are different levels. I mean, the same way we look at the risks in our different organizations, there is of course medium risk, there is high risk, and of course there is that risk that then you can easily say this one, you only need to advise the person to take 3 or 4 precautionary measures and they're able to mitigate the risk. So then the witness protection agency also looks at it that way. But beyond the witness protection aspect of it or ambit of it, you come to the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act that has established the victims of trafficking in persons trust fund. And in this fund, I alluded that we have the board of trustees who manage this trust fund. So the role of the trust fund is to then identify what are the crucial needs of a victim of trafficking and what must be done. So the role of the trust fund really is not limited to when the matter has gone to court. Unlike the witness protection agency, in most cases, the witness protection agency will require that there is a case that is being prosecuted or a case that has the probability or the potential of getting into the courts. But on the other side, the victims of trafficking are literally protected in our Kenyan laws, in that we have a fund that has been established under the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act, looking at the victim's needs, even at the point of identification. So as long as a proper identification process has been undertaken by a relevant actor, and this particular case I would say by a first responder or relevant, there is a name we give that, but a person who has that mandate to identify and ascertain and conclude that this person is a victim of trafficking, then that particular duty bearer or person is able then to advise that the needs of this particular victim is the fact that they have gone through trauma and they need trauma-based counseling. They probably need a shelter. They probably need a lot of other needs that come in. So the trust fund again then comes in to sort of now state that we are able to provide, or we are able to jointly work with institution or civil society, ABCD, and provide this assistance. Again, at the point of advising what this victim needs to get and how and where, then the advisory committee comes also to help in that conversation. And that's why within the board that is managing the Victims of Trafficking Trust Fund, we have our advisory committee chairperson serving also in that particular board. The whole idea is just to ensure that these conversations are done very well. But at the point of who has the duty to advise the victim on when to raise this concern and where to get this support, I would say is the person who is assisting at that particular time. Because oftentimes victims do not know whether they need to ask for this service. But you who is looking at the case, you who has received the case, looking at the facts, and even appreciating the condition of the victim of trafficking, you are at a position and a better position to then use the national referral mechanisms guidelines, contact maybe the Children Protection DCI unit, or the unit that then deals with anti-human trafficking in DCI, or even contact the CTIP, the Counter Trafficking in Persons Secretariat, or any CSO that is able to offer that help. If we do so, then we will be assisting this victim to get into the proper systems. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Veronica. One thing that comes out clearly is that, and I like the analysis that you've given. Then one asks this question: we talked about the gap of, coordination. Do we have kind of this working in a way that when a victim needs support services, do we have this assessment impact report so that you are able to link this victim into different support services? And that means then if they are not able to have that impact report to ensure that they get that required service that they ought to get at that particular time, then it means that case is not moving forward. And that's why when Dorcas was talking about some of the gaps that are making these cases not to move forward, we talk about, people feeling that the process is not really supportive in a way, because interagencies are not cooperating to ensure that these victims are supported the way they are supposed to support. I'll come back to you when we talk about some of the challenges of implementing the Counter-Trafficking in Person Act of 2010, the law itself, how it is framed, how is it enforceable and all that. We may need to look at the case from Uganda. We have a law that was enacted in 2009, I may be corrected, the Anti-Human Trafficking Act of 2009. I wish we had Dora. I saw her in, and I think she's not able to join, but I've seen her message. Annette, what has been the experience of victims and access to justice in Uganda? What has been the challenges?
Thank you, Evans. I don't know. Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you.
You can, eh?
Yeah.
Of course, access to has several challenges for victims. Have already been shared in this group. But one of the aspects I can bring is the whole aspect of trauma and how trauma access to justice. There are quite a number of things that trauma does to a victim, and there could be cognitive issues, there could be physical, but one of the things I think they struggle with is when they start giving evidence, either they have responses or they have piecemeal responses. I have a bit of feedback, so you can hear me well. Can you?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I'm trying to speak slowly because and so once they start working with law enforcement, with prosecution, and they seem like
Amos.
It looks like
then the
Annette,
system can.
we're losing you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Or proceed. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that their trauma sometimes affects the way they witness or the way they share their stories, and many times they may not might cause them not to want to cooperate with it. And so part of supporting a victim means that all stakeholders need to screen for trauma and factor in trauma issues in whether testimony or how much they to proceed with justice. Now that's with that individual. Of course, if the process is long and there are barriers in the process, most victims lose interest because their resilience levels are usually very low and they don't grow. But there are also that are attached to perpetrators, and it's very common for law enforcement, for prosecutors, and sometimes these psychological attachments to the perpetrators will interfere with their justice. And then, of course, the system is not working well, or they don't have their other needs met. All those things affect access to justice. So for now, I can pause there, and then we can keep building the conversation.
Thank you, Annette. I think we struggled really to hear what you are saying, but I take note
I'm also
that psychosocial support services is a gap, if I could correct what you mentioned, and that this
Yes,
also
it's true.
hampers the preparedness of these victims to be able to access justice and some of other things. There is a question being asked by the Honorable Dora. I'm trying to see if she joins. And this you can take Dorcas. She's asking, does plea bargaining involve the victim survivor? Is a victim impact assessment report taken into account in your area of engagement with the survivors, the victims, and the law enforcement? How will you respond to that?
Thank you for that question. I bet Evelyn would have been better placed to answer it, but
I know.
I think the plea bargaining, because at the end of the day, it also involves the victim. Like the case has been brought forward because the victim has complained that parts of some of his or her rights have been taken away. So I think when the court is or when the prosecution is court and the prosecution is considering on the victim, on the plea bargaining, they will also put into consideration the how the victim or the complainant is going to be affected by that decision. But let me say, I am not very sure of my response. I have not interacted with that to a deeper level.
Great. Veronica, the question of if the laws that exist, I have had interactions with some of the prayers in this implementation of this act. Some of them, they are from the judiciary, some are from the DPP, some are from the DCI. The law itself, the way it is, without really poking into some of the sections of it, or rather the articles, is it enforceable? The Counter-Trafficking Act of 2010. What are some of the gaps that exist? Why is it that it's not a document that is not actionable? The police, what we call the people who do chats at the police station, they are not using it, and you find that even the DPP at some level, they are not willing to use it. They use other laws like the Sexual Offences Act, the Penal Code, to move with the case forward, and they dropped the Counter-Trafficking Act of 2010. Why is it that it is not practically possible to always, all the time, use that law? Is it the question of awareness, or is it the question of capacity? Or is the question of interpretation?
Okay. Thank you for that. Allow me to first go back to what Dorcas was responding to, the question on plea bargaining, and just add a bit. In Kenya, plea bargaining is largely a process that involves the prosecution and the offender, the accused person. So at the point where the two are conversing on whether to allow the offender or the accused person to take in or to admit guilty on a lesser offense, it's largely a conversation of the two. But the rules and the law again provides an opportunity for the victim impact assessment report to be filed. So that then means the voice of the victim again can be taken into consideration. And this is where we as actors come in to enhance that voice. So that then we are not just saying the plea bargaining on one end and sort of just miss out on the victims or the victims of trafficking rights. So then there is need for that. So, so the question on whether the victim is involved, the victim is involved, but probably at a third party conversation and not necessarily at a primary party level. Then let me go back to the question on whether our Counter Trafficking in Persons Act here in Kenya is enforceable, or why is it that we are having challenges in terms of implementing or applying this particular law. I want to respond and state clearly that our Counter Trafficking in Persons Act here in Kenya is a law that is currently in use. So in terms of its enforceability, it is being enforced, but of course not in a rate that would of course appreciate 10 years after its enactment. However, the main challenge as to why the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act here in Kenya and globally remain a law that is lesser applied in prosecution, it's because of the high benchmark of the evidential requirement that then pertains that particular crime. So we look at trafficking in persons or human trafficking cases as international crimes. And in this conversation, when you're looking at cross-border interactions and cross-border crimes, it means a trafficker could be based probably in Asia, but the trafficker has his dynamics and his cartels in East Africa, and he's able to then use these cartels, the smuggling networks, the trafficking networks, and even institutions which are government and sometimes even the civil society organizations to perpetuate some of these trafficking incidences. So as these cases are happening, you realize an officer who is not given specialized training on how to follow up on some of these cases of trafficking, they would automatically miss out the human trafficking dynamic and instead look at the primary violation that has been reported. Allow me to just give an illustration of a girl who is brought to the police station, and the conversation or the alleged violation at that particular point is that this girl does not belong to this family, but came in as a domestic worker. But in the process, she ended up leaving her domestic work in this house and was taken to a certain brothel where she continued to engage in sexual exploitation. So at that particular point, the police is dealing, or the police will be dealing with a case of a child sexual abuse. And this is from the eyes and the perspective of an officer who has not been given specialized training. So there is a possibility that this police officer will really follow up and prosecute or take this or tag this accused person under the Sexual Offences Act, which has lesser, which has a lesser benchmark in terms of evidence, because then all I need to know as an officer at that particular point is to try and connect this child with the sexual exploitation and that particular owner of that particular brothel, and so on and so forth. However, if you then now bring in a specialized person who has been trained on how to investigate trafficking in persons cases, they will go beyond the sexual offense. They will start asking the big question as to who exactly is this girl? How did she find herself in this family, in this brothel? Who brought her from country A to country B? And those nitty-gritties on exactly where were the proceeds of this brothel going, and so on. So what I would really say, the challenge we really have with the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act in Kenya is not that the law is not enforceable, but it is largely a capacity issue, awareness issue, and lack of specialized training of investigators on how best, and even prosecutors, on how best to investigate and prosecute cases of trafficking in persons. Thank you.
And I agree with you on the issue of capacity and awareness, and of course the interest. Somebody has asked a question on what are some of, on the same issue really, on what are some of the illegal emerging issues in human trafficking. If you can respond so that Dorcas can be able to respond on the question of public interest litigations cases if we can use them to enhance the protection at the regional level, victim protection at the regional level.
Evans, just to alert us,
what are some of the
we have 10 more minutes
issues in human trafficking in a second or in 1 minute?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Somebody's asking, what are some of the emerging legal issues in human trafficking?
Well, the emerging issues, especially in human trafficking, is just one gap that I really want to allude to in our current act. The fact that it does not speak directly to the responsibility of transporters. So that then you would get, like, I would go back to the case of the 96 Ugandan ladies who are intercepted, the victims of trafficking who are intercepted at the JKIA. Assuming these, just looking at the reality, these girls were on board a certain aircraft or something of that sort from point A to point B, or they were taken to the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport by virtue of maybe transportation of bus and so on. So the concern that we really have is how can we target the transporter so that then if you are given a number of girls, a number of boys, and you are told take them from point A to B, what responsibility can we put at that particular point? So some of those are some of the legal dynamics that come in. But in actual fact, I think from my perspective, capacity is all we need. We just need to enhance capacity and appreciation of this law, and then ensure that also the communities are also empowered. Because the reason why Sexual Offences Act is mostly youth, and it is a familiar law even with the society. You clearly know when you are offended, when you're exploited sexually, even as a parent, as you go to report, you know the Sexual Offences Act. So we just need to do a lot of work on public awareness on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for that insight. Public interest litigation cases. Yeah. Yes, Devon. Time.
Before Dorcas comes in, I just have one question.
Please, Devon, go ahead.
And the question, Veronica or Dorcas could respond to it.
Yeah.
Are there?
You're breaking, eh? Devon, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can't hear you. You could type it on the chat.
Internal trafficking.
Sorry.
Demon. Well, I think we have lost it. You will ask it once he's back. Dorcas, the question of public interest litigation cases. How can we use it at the regional level to enhance victim protection?
I think public interest litigation is necessary, as most of the time it usually shines light on some of the neglected issues that are facing, in our case, children who have been trafficked. And hence, when these public interest litigations goes to court and they are dealt with, I think the public is enabled and is made aware of the issues that we are trying to tackle on, let's say, the trafficking of children and the forms of trafficking of children that are involved in, let's say, the sexual exploitation or prostitution, working in brothel, providing cheap, harmful labor, that the public gets to know, and they get to know. It's more of awareness creation, where they get to know on the issues that are happening to the children, such that in the community level, they can also note what is going on and also raise awareness and report such cases. So I think how we can use them, the public interest litigation, to enhance victim protection would be to make them more aware so the public can react and also try and prevent these vices from happening to the children. So it will more or less prevent the vice and make the victims feel less re-victimized, because most of the time what they usually go through, if people do not understand, or if the duty bearers do not understand what is going on with the victims, they somehow re-victimize them, such that, for instance, what Veronica had mentioned on a child who had been brought to Kenya to work as a house help, and then in the course of it, he went and worked as in a brothel. So if, let's say, the law enforcement does not investigate this case thoroughly to get the genesis of how this child got into where she is right now, the victim would end up being re-victimized, and in the real sense, that victim is supposed to attain justice for the things that he has gone through. So I think the more these things are coming to light, the more protection the victims will get, and the more understanding the public will have issues that are going on.
Thank you so much. We have about 2 minutes to end. And based on, Damon, you could ask your question in a minute. We couldn't hear you. Are you able to hear us now?
Sorry. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, proceed.
We're talking a lot about the trafficking out of the country, and I was wondering about the cases of internal trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly concerned about it, interested in it, because when you look at the border of Uganda and Kenya, you cannot tell who is Ugandan and who is Kenyan. We very well know that you had a minister who was, no, we had a minister who was, who had a brother who was a vice president in Kenya. So we cannot even separate the two. And what are your thoughts around that? You know, you can't tell the difference between a Masai and the Karamajong. They all look alike. The Pokots, you know, yeah.
So what is the question, Damon?
Yes.
I wanted a comment on.
Oh, okay.
I wanted a comment on internal trafficking. I wanted a comment on internal trafficking.
Okay. I think that's fair enough that when we talk about trafficking, there is external and internal trafficking, which is very important. And many times I tell my participants that we are party to it in one way or the other without knowing. So it's important that we open our eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this session. I wish we had more time to dissect much of
Evans?
I think the internet has dissected him.
So I think Damon, you can take over.
Yeah, I think we've come to the end, and we can now go back to join the last panel. There is opportunity for network. You see on the left there, you can do networking. If you have enjoyed Victoria and Veronica, sorry, and you want to engage a little more, you can go ahead, Dorcas. Those who have missed seeing me, we can go ahead and have a conversation.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say something before we break. That by and large, the issue of, yes, okay. The issue of coordination. Access to justice cannot be a standalone. So there is some level that we need to understand that partnership plays a key role among key players in government and civil society organizations. For example, we talked about victim support services and victim protection services. There is an element on protection. How best can we be able to support the community itself? How can we capacity build the law enforcers? That came out strongly. That is a huge gap. how can we popularize the existing laws, both Kenya and Uganda, so that when we talk about trafficking, somebody is able to pick it so quickly that we have a law in Uganda of 2009 and we have a law in Kenya of 2010. And of course, making it simpler versions of it, like the Sexual Offences Act and other laws that exist. When we talk about national referral mechanisms, I can tell you they are not popular as well. Because in that document, there is a provision that we need to make some standard operating procedures guidelines so simpler. So we are engaging in a business that at times, if I can use the language of not understanding the means and the ways of how to operate it, it's extremely important that we familiarize ourselves with the existing documentation on it. And of course, when we talk about prevention, we create awareness on all the actors that we work so that it's easier for us to implement and enforce the programs. And for this, research informed that is documented is important for purposes of creating a more impactful planning and design of programs that are able to directly make an impact to the society. Thank you so much, and I think I end there. Unless, Damon, you have a comment or two, we can engage at the networking, or we go back to stage. So we end it here.
Yes, suppose.
Yes.
I think, yes, we can do that. And some questions were not answered. Maybe you can give direction on how those will be done. Maybe
Yes.
can
I tried to pick some of the questions. I know Dora is asking a lot of questions about the East Africa, litigations and all that. But I think most of the questions, in one way or the other, have been answered indirectly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then I think we can be able to engage on you can go to the networking, but I think most of those questions we can be able to engage each other there. It has been a pleasure moderating this group, and I see you at the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.